Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. All right, it's June, which means it's WWDC time, and as I don't know if we're followers of Apple, but at least we take an interest in some of the items that they release from time to time. It's usual wrap up at this time of the year of having a look at what they've done, and obviously also from our perspective. Just generally,
very exciting, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. But just generally speaking, I thought it was a more interesting year this year. How did you find it overall?
Yeah, it was. It was more interesting because it wasn't just more software or more, hardware that was a bit yawn. It was actually new, I think, horizons for where this is all going. So I found it really quite intriguing.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the M2 MacBook Air, which obviously I think was probably if you want to call it the flashiest announcement because of the fact that it's a new design, a nice new midnight blue color, which I personally would purchase if I was going to purchase this laptop, but we'll get to that in a minute. And obviously the launch of the new M2 chip, and they're really, although it's sort of an iterative update to the M series chips, it's still very impressive. It basically takes what the M1 did, which was brilliant, and sort of refine it with some additional features. The one thing that sort of stood out for me, at least in the M2 chip, before we talk about the Air, is the fact that they included a media encoding engine into the chip itself, which the M1 didn't have, which would make it better for things like video editing and any other, that type of work. Which again, that's why it caught my attention. But then there's also, looking at the MacBook Air, the design, like, it's ridiculously thin. It's taken on the design language of the higher tier MacBook Pros, but just in a much thinner form factor. And arguably, it's really for 95% of users, it's really the only Mac you really should be getting, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, look, with that added sort of graphics capacity, I mean, that unlocks everything for all the future applications. And we've spoken about this before, how, I guess for us now, 20 years ago, just being able to edit in standard definition video was the key to the future. It's now 4K, in some cases 8K. It's 3D rendering, for gaming, for graphics. And the fact that now we're seeing this range of Mac products with these capabilities, and I tell you what, in a MacBook Air, who would have even thought that this was possible? And this all comes down to this M chip, the Apple Silicon. This is a huge step because this is opening up the next era of creativity, and it's going to show that Apple's right at the forefront of it. That's why I find all of these announcements this year particularly so interesting, because they really are focusing on the future applications and not just, we've added a new feature or, updated the operating system.
Absolutely. I did want to touch on the fact that they also released basically another 13-inch MacBook Pro, but it's basically the same as the last one, just with the M2 chip installed. And I want to sort of mention that in context with the launch of the MacBook Air, because one of the reasons that back when the M1 MacBook Pro was announced first, I argued that to get that one if you had certain use cases, like for me, the better,
which I did. Well done, Ben. Thank you.
The better battery, studio mics, better display. So there was, and I guess some more sustained performance with the fan, etc. But this time around, the M2 MacBook Air has closed the gap between a lot of those things to the point where I can't see what the reason is to actually buy the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M2 chip this time around, other than if there's a tiny market segment that Apple's identified as that they can still service. But the thing is that, and this is something I want to get into as well, is around the pricing structure, which that's not really a sexy topic in these types of announcements, but I actually think it's important to discuss because if you're looking at just the base models, there's a linear progression as you go up the line, so it makes sense why one's less than the other, and etc. But once you start to custom config some of the, say, the Air, there's a version of the MacBook Air that is the same price as the MacBook Pro, where you have the same componentry in it. So then you're going, well, why would you buy the MacBook Pro? But crucially for me, and this is why I won't be buying the MacBook Air, because I am looking for an upgrade at some point. The one thing, the two things, I'll come back to the custom configuration pricing in a minute. But one thing is obviously the limitation of the one external display support, which to me seems totally arbitrary at this point. Obviously, you have to buy the higher end MacBook Pros for that. But in the pricing structure, it also doesn't make sense to me because I want to get at least a 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage for the next one that I get as a minimum. But if you custom config that on the Air, you're actually within a couple of $100 of the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which, even though it's got the M1 Pro chip, that's still a beefier chip than the M2, and you get a lot better hardware in the actual device as well, like significantly better. The display is much better, the SSDs are better, the mics are better, the speakers are better. And so it can lead to some confusion. Like for me, I didn't see any convincing case for me to buy an Air because where I would want it to get to satisfy storage requirements and whatever, I would just be better off getting the 14-inch MacBook Pro still. And I wonder if there's a lot of conversations like that people might have when they're looking at what they're going to buy, unless, of course, they're just going to buy a straight-up base model.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So maybe, there's the segment of the market that will just buy the base level, and they browse and, maybe use a little bit of Office or something like that. But I suspect that maybe the purpose of that MacBook Air is to sell more 14-inch MacBook Pros. That's and wow, from what you've just said about the 14-inch MacBook Pro, I think I want one with the M2.
Absolutely. And the rumor mill suggesting that an M2 Pro version of that is coming out later in the year with any luck. So we'll see what happens from that. One thing I did want to touch on, obviously WWDC is a bit more about software updates, of course, for developers. And this new version of macOS that's coming out was actually, and we'll get to iOS and iPadOS as well, because this applies to those as well. They were a bit more aggressive this time in dropping support for older Macs. And sticking with macOS for the time being, what stuck out at me is that the 2017 iMac that I've still got, I was expecting maybe another couple of years of software support for that. But because of this new update, this is now the 2017 iMac is now the absolute oldest Mac that you can run the new macOS on, which leads me to think that this time next year, it may not be supported anymore. I thought that was kind of extraordinary. I mean, it may be that I might go down that route anyway, because I was thinking of swapping it out for just a monitor going forward. But it's just interesting that they were a bit more aggressive this time. And I have to say that also applies in the iOS world. There were more iPhones and iPads dropped off the list this year compared to previous years. And I found that interesting in the context of Apple's known for its long-term support. Now, you can't argue that 5+ years is still good. That's still pretty good, and it's still the best in the industry, really. But still, it's fascinating, isn't it, that they went a bit more aggressive? And I have to wonder, and maybe you have a bit more experience with this than I have, but I had heard that when they did the shift from PowerPC to Intel, that they were pretty aggressive at dropping the support for the PowerPC models back in the day, and I'm wondering if they're replicating that now.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any corporate history that suggests that that's what's happening. I mean, they did it with the PowerPCs, and they also did it, I think, when they shifted away from Motorola the first time as well. So Apple do have a history of it, but still, I mean, yeah, I guess, for us, 5 or 6 years seems short in Apple land. But the reality is that, it's probably quite long in PCs. Anyone who would endure more than 2 or 3 years of their same old beige box or clunky laptop would think 4 or 5 years would be a sentence, not a delight. But on a Mac, you should typically be able to get 6 and 8 happy years of usage.
Absolutely. And it should also be noted that Apple still supports the 2 versions prior to the new version that gets released for, I think, another 2 years anyway. So it's not as if, from a security perspective, I guess. So they're still usable, of course. It's just first world problems and all. Have to go out and buy.
Exactly.
Have to go out and look at the store and buy some more stuff or something.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Another feature that actually popped out at me, and this actually talks to the iPad, and I just want to take a step back and mention that after I gotten the M1 MacBook Pro, I actually find I'm not using the iPad that much because the Mac has become just as responsive. I would reach for the iPad when I would get frustrated in the past with the fan spinning up and things not going as quickly on the Mac as what they did on the iPad. But now they're on parity in that respect, thanks to the M-class chips. And it made me wonder, well, what's happening with the iPad? Because they haven't really iterated that much in the software to make it like, why do we have this thing? The one feature that they did introduce, which unfortunately is only exclusive to the M1 iPads, but at least it's there, is the full external display support, and also this feature called Stage Manager, which effectively allows multi-window support while using the iPad. So effectively, it created a more macOS-like experience without it being macOS, so that it was still a distinct iPad sort of interface. I actually was quite excited by that because my next iteration of my setup here is, like I was mentioning before, a monitor on the desk that I then just bring a device to and plug it in, which means the iPad and the Mac could then be plugged into that setup because now that this iPad's going to get, the external display support.
Yeah, it's interesting you made that comment at the start because I haven't used an iPad since I got my MacBook Pro with the M1. I love my MacBook Pro. I've said that a number of times, So yeah, it's really interesting to hear about your experiences with the iPad because I've left it behind. I find the MacBook Pro to be, just as easy to browse. It doesn't warm your lap up like a PC or anything like that. It's great. It's quiet. It's quick. Everything. But I think you're right. I think even I myself now finding myself moving to that. Where you want a small sort of laptop or something you can sit on your lap in front of the TV or whatever. Browse, do whatever you want. And then when you want to do some work, you want to just be able to connect seamlessly with a screen and use that larger format. So that's definitely, you can see now that Apple's really starting to not just say that you can use this device wirelessly with a screen, but to really, deepen the experience when you do.
Absolutely. I did want to mention iOS 16 actually brings lock screen customization to the iPhone. Android users are laughing their heads off because of the fact that it's like 10 years late or whatever. Whatever. But at least they finally brought it, and it's like a not chicken and the egg, but it's like a be careful what you wish for type feature, because to me you could just like endlessly keep customizing this because you're never 100% happy, and it sounds like you can have multiple lock screens as well based on your mood and the time of day and the focus mode you're in, and that's great that you've got all of that, but you don't necessarily need it, because the one useful thing I think it brought all kidding aside, was that they have, I think it was 2 things. It was the fact that widgets are now on the screen, so you can get some live updates on specific crucial information. And they also created a new notification center, which also included live activities. A classic example that I think that was used in the presentation was, you've ordered an Uber, you don't want to actually go into the Uber app to see where's your car. and you also don't want to get 10 text messages, every minute that it's getting closer to your house or something. So it translates it into what looks like a live feed on your lock screen saying, it's 6 minutes away, 5 minutes away, or whatever it is. And I think it like sports scores can be put in there like that and all that sort of thing if you're interested in that. So that sort of functionality I think is quite crucial. But yeah, I don't know if there's the peril of choice, I guess, in terms of customization.
Look, I guess there'll be a lot of people today that'll sit down, spend an hour to set up the workflow for that lock screen, so they've got everything they want at whatever given time of day, for a work scenario right through to a leisure or recreation scenario. I think it's fantastic that these features exist. Just not sure that I'm ever going to use them.
Absolutely. One other thing that Apple mentioned that was quite interesting, it seems like they're turning into a bit of a bank now these days with this new Apple Pay Later feature. At first, I thought they must have done a deal with the bank to enable this, but it sounds like what's happening is Apple's actually going to pay the vendor the full amount, and then you effectively owe Apple the 4 installment plan payments or whatever without interest, which I thought that's a really interesting sort of business they're getting into there with that. And I mean, it plays into their services, like broadening their services, but it's interesting that they've gone that route and introduced that.
Well, it's just an expansion of their ecosystem, and of course we know that Apple makes a lot of money out of their devices through their app store and now through effectively a finance arm. And we've seen other like industries do this in the past, such as the motor industry, which has its own financing revenue stream within the industry. It doesn't just sell cars, it also sells the finance. And I guess Apple's effectively doing the same thing now on the device that you go ka-ching with. So they've got all your details. They know what you like. They can direct the advertising to you, and then they can, arrange the finance as well. It's a pretty good business model, whichever way you look at it, and bound to be successful.
Absolutely. One last thing I wanted to touch on, which beyond what Apple announced, was actually all of the stream of videos that came out from YouTubers covering the event afterwards, and it led me to think about life as a YouTuber. Well, I don't think that's what we are. I think we're podcasters by comparison. And the reason why I say that is that YouTubers have to really be punching out content all the time to maintain their view count and the interest from the audience to, for it to keep going, to the point where it can be almost debilitating, because you're almost thinking about it 24/7, and it becomes a lifestyle to the point that you can't miss posting a video on a schedule, whether it's 2 or 3 times a week or whatever. And it made me think about that when I saw all of these videos come out, all very well produced, very well done. I don't want to be too harsh here, but a lot of them were the same. Like basically with a different host presenting the same information with the same impressions. But still, it's good that, that kind of content is so well produced and so well put together, and they've got their sort of process down. But for me, I just don't think I could do it, because it just seems like you can't step away from it at any point, otherwise, because as soon as you do, you're off the train and you're done, kind of thing.
Well, look, I think I love this video because, there's a lot of people out there who can't get off the treadmill, and they're just consumers of this sort of content. That pops up in their feed, and they're forever scrolling through their feeds and watching content like this. Like you, I love to see well-produced content. Of course, there's always a format. You can't produce good content without a format and just, effectively doing it over and over again, but the secret is making it looking new and fresh and different every time. But as you point out, the flip side is you get on this treadmill, and on one side of the treadmill you've got the consumers who just endlessly go through hundreds of these sorts of videos, in a week. And on the other side, you've got the people who have to churn them out, and you can't miss a beat. You've got to be absolutely spot on in your production. You've got to be spot on in, your messaging within that production, within, the actual content itself. And then you have to be spot on in terms of distributing and supporting the distribution of that content. And, unfortunately, what our friend in the video really points out is that he got burnt out doing it. I was surprised he didn't just come out and say it, but he might not realise it. He's just talking about the heavy toll it took on him. I mean, anywhere else, if you were in a workplace anywhere else, that would be burnout. And you can see why. Great video, and well done. I mean, it's hard, but you can see how much effort goes into it. And you can also see why, in a more traditional content studio, you'd have 4 or 5 people working on each episode instead of 1 or 1.5.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. For me personally, I didn't see anything in there that I would be purchasing in terms of anything that Apple announced hardware-wise. I really did want to give the MacBook Air a go, but I want a bit more headroom for Final Cut, and I want my multi-display support. So unfortunately, that kind of pushes me into 14-inch MacBook Pro territory.
And
what a tough decision.
You will be editing in ultra high definition before you know it.
Yes, absolutely. Any choices for you? Anything that stuck out for you? After we wrap up?
I think you've sold me on the 14-inch MacBook Pro as well.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. And so don't forget to check out our website, SciTechCulture.com. All of our links and content are on there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels and our RSS feeds there, and we've got a whole lot of other content, blogs, etc. that you can check out, and we greatly appreciate your visits. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.